Your car guy here, 2002 Toyota Corolla. We're going to change the fuel pump. Pretty easy job, not too much to it. First thing we got to do to get some access to it is we're going to remove the bottom of the back seat. So we're going to remove this bottom, and there's not a lot to it other than reaching down underneath and the front of it and popping it up to pop it loose on both sides, and then you'll feed the seat belts through as you pull it out and get that clear. Okay, the seat's out of the way. This cover is our fuel pump cover, and it just simply pulls up and off. They have some mastic there. Then to get this to fully disconnect, we got to disconnect the electrical connection, which is right here. This is a connection that'll have the connection for both the fuel pump and what they call the sending unit, meaning your gauge for your fuel pump. So there's a tab right here that you will squeeze and unlock and pull this up. With the electrical connector disconnected, next thing you're going to do is remove the fuel line. Now remember, this may have some fuel pressure left in it. One good way to reduce the fuel pressure is to pull the fuel pump fuse and to crank the car till it won't run anymore, and that'll drop all the fuel pressure in this. Once you have your fuel pressure relieved, it's not as bad, but if you have your fuel pressure, either way, you want to have some rags handy, so when you pull it up, you'll take it off. Now what we're going to do, this yellow is a lock, and it has to be pulled away this direction in order to unlock the fuel pump. Now, you should be able to do this with your fingers. That simply unlocks the fuel pump so that it can be, or not the fuel pump, but the fuel pump line, fuel line, so that it can then be removed. And then it'll be a matter of pulling it straight up and out. Once that's out, we're going to remove these screws around the perimeter. Note that you will want that yellow locking clip all the way out. Otherwise, it will still be blocking the lip there on the fuel line. So with it out of the way, you can then use your rag to protect against fuel spray and simply lift the fuel line out. And you say no fuel spray here, mainly because we'd already released the pressure. Next thing I'm going to do is take out all my bolts and lift my pump out. Now that we've taken off the hold down cover and all the bolts, we have the pump is actually free and can just be moved up out. Now you're going to have to work it a little bit because you have several things going on here. You have a pressure regulator, you have a sock, and you have the sending unit. So it's got to be worked up and out very gently so that we don't break anything. And already I see we've got issues where the pressure regulator mounts, which will be something we can fix, which is part of why we're having problems with this. All right, I want you to see this. Now this vehicle's been experiencing fuel pressure issues, and you can see this right here is our fuel pressure regulator. This obviously should have been clamped down and up in there tight. Also our fuel pump cover should be up in there tight. Now we're putting a new fuel pump, new regulator and such in here, but if you have issues like that, you are going to have fuel problems. Now, this whole assembly runs about $1,000, but instead I've ordered a new pressure regulator, new fuel pump, and the internal filter that goes in here for significantly less, say about $200, so that we can do this much more efficiently, cost-wise, and also this new filter sock or screen for the inlet of the fuel. So we're going to pop this apart and get it done. So with this upside down, you can see the first thing we'd normally need to do is take these tabs and pull them out over these locks on both sides. Now we see one side's already popped off, so we'll just be able to pull those tabs to get access and unlock this bottom cover that has the filter screen on it. We take it out of our way. We now have access to our fuel pressure regulator, which has blown right out of the housing here where it should be fully seated. So there's fuel pressure problems because this wasn't seated fully in there. And then we'll go ahead and we've got our rubber isolator gasket. And we've got our filter screen, which you can see there's just a little locking clip here. You'll simply pry that up gently with a screwdriver, and then you can remove this entire screen. Alright, so I've got the screen off. I've taken the regulator out. Now we need to take this cover off, which you'll see there's just locking tabs around it. There's a total of 4 locking tabs. It's just a matter of prying gently with a screwdriver or pushing those tabs in, whichever way is a little easier. I think it'll be a better prying out gently to release this whole assembly and lift it off. You'll see that the fuel pump will drop down enough for you to unplug it. You simply need to press in right here on this clip just above on the black part to release it, and then you can unplug the fuel pump and pull it out of the way. I've already got this popped loose, and then I can get to the filter. Okay, with our filter removed, which this is our filter, we've got our new one right here. There are a few things that you'll see on this inlet side that was up against the cap. This piece and O-ring were up in there. So I just took a pick and pulled the O-ring out. And basically all this is gonna have been, is this was what sits right here and holds everything together. So the O-ring would have been, sits right like that, and this just slips over it. So when you're gonna put your new one on, you'll just slide it down. You may want to put a little bit of lube on this. Tiny bit of oil would be fine, so that when it goes on it doesn't pinch. The other thing you're gonna need to make sure of is there's this rubber isolator on the bottom. You want to make sure and transfer that to the new filter. The O-ring and such in place, we're simply going to take this and we put a little lube on that O-ring to help it slide down into place, and we'll get our filter installed. Then we can start installing our cover and our pump. Now our pump, remember, we can install, because we have enough lead, we can put this cover on first before we put the pump on. We'll simply slide this back over, make sure we have our wiring in place so that our wire comes up through the middle here, and then we'll latch this. Okay, see how I've got my wiring sitting through, and then I just push this down until it all locks into place. Next, we can install the fuel pump right here. Okay, old fuel pump here versus new fuel pump. We'll see a few things. We've got to take this yellow cap, and the O-ring actually sits under it. I pulled the O-ring off so I can pry this up gently without damaging it. And this will all need to be transferred onto this. You'll need to remove this and discard it. This is simply a seal to keep dirt and junk from getting in the pump in shipping before it's sold. Same thing with this lower one here. Okay, here you can see I've transferred those parts over to the new fuel pump. When I put it in, I'm simply going to plug in my electrical first, and then I'm going to make sure as I put this down in, I want to put a little lube on this and get this fully seated down into the filter that it's going to be pushing the fuel through. Alright, this is the pump sitting fully down. You see we're almost flush here with this metal housing. This is coming up a little bit, but this is the hole in the filter that the pump is actually going into. It's easier to show it to you out here versus up in here. You technically could have put the pump on before you put the cover on, either way, but we've made sure we're sitting down nice, fully inserted. Next we can install our filter here, and we can install our fuel pressure regulator. So this boot filter that's going to go on here. Okay, so we remove the shipping cap. Then we're going to take the new filter screen. It comes with, you'll see the little locking clip. The teeth should be facing up when you put them on. The first thing we're going to do, you'll see there's a hole here. This goes over this nub. The large hole underneath goes over here, and then the locking tab goes on with those tangs pointed up, and simply press them down. Note the shipping plug that's in this filter and remove it prior to installation. Otherwise you'll get no fuel. So do that, and then this is simply gonna snap right down on there. Just like so, you'll see. Make sure when you put this filter on that you get it fully seated. You see under that chrome ring, we're all the way down against the base of the filter. Now we'll simply put our retaining clip in. Okay, you see I've got my retaining clip ready to install on there, right there. Cool trick for putting these on, because they can be a pain. Get a small socket that's just bigger than that center tang in there, and use it to drive this down very gently. You don't want to be pounding on this assembly and breaking it, but very gently to drive that down into place. And here you see it fully installed, driven into place. In this case, I just used my 5mm socket. Deep well made it easy because it fit right over that, and I just tapped very gently on this. Here's our new fuel pressure regulator with the O-ring on it. It's going to go right into this hole and need to be pushed down and fully seated. Now note, I'm going to put a little bit of lube on this O-ring to help this come down in and lock into place. There it is, fuel pressure regulator fully seated. Remember when we first took this apart, this thing was blown out, and really was probably a major part of our problem because fuel was just bypassing it, therefore not allowing it to build pressure. Now, before we finish up, a couple of quick things to note. We do have a rubber isolator that's going to go on the fuel pump here. Now, a new one came with the new fuel pump that we'll install before we clip the cover on. Otherwise, it doesn't hold this securely in place. So it's designed to be a vibration dampener and keep everything in place. And here we are with that rubber in place. Now it's just a matter of installing our cover here and making sure that our cover is fully locked into place with everything fully installed. And there it is, fully assembled. Notice we're fully locked. We're secure here. I'm not sure what popped that off the first time, if it wasn't on right when it was first installed or when somebody did this job. Now we can simply work this back down into the tank, put our cover back on, and hook it up and test it. Okay, for installation, so we've got on the right that black kind of triangular pie-shaped thing is your fuel level sending unit. Then you've got another sensor in there, and then our sock. We're going to actually get those sensors in first at an angle in the sock, then turn the whole assembly down, work it past the regulator, and into place. Okay, to align the pump, we simply set our cover back on. See how it'll go over these two white tabs here, and then it'll line up with our bolt holes. Then we can simply put all our bolts back in, tighten it up. This does not have to be super tight, guys. It's very simple. We're going to put all our bolts in, then we'll hook back up our fuel line and our electrical connection, and we'll test it before we put the back seat back in, just so in case you have to pull it back out again, you're not going to do the job twice. Okay, we've tightened up our bolts. We'll simply put our fuel line back in place. Don't forget to put the locking clip in, otherwise you're going to end up with that line blowing off as soon as this thing builds any fuel pressure, because 60 psi possibly out of this, or at least 50, it'll just blow this right off the top, and then you'll have a massive fuel leak. So we make sure to reinsert our lock tab and get it fully seated down. That way the fuel line cannot come off. We're also going to take our electrical connection, reconnect it, and we can simply lay the cover back in place, because again, it's just held in with a body sealant. And now, before we put the back seat back in, we're going to test the fuel. All right, we've now run the vehicle, verified that it's operating properly. We don't have any leaks, externally at least. So now we just need to put the rear seat in. You can see the rear seat, we've got these tabs. So when you set it in, you're going to kind of set it in up on end, so that those go up under the back seat. Don't forget, while you've got this front part up, tuck your seat belts through on both sides. Make sure to get all three. And then we'll simply push down the front once we have this all slid up in there tight to lock it in place. And there it is, Back seat's back in place. Seat belts are through, and we're done. This was really a pretty quick, simple job. You should be able to do it for less than $200 with buying all the parts online. And if you budget yourself an hour, you should be able to do it well under an hour, maybe even less. This is your car guy. Please subscribe to the channel, help us grow, and like and share our videos. If you have any questions, shoot me a note.